How your brain has been programmed to sabotage you. Since kindergarten. Your first classroom was not just a place of learning, it was your first lab of conditioning. From the moment you stepped into that bright, colorful room, your brain began absorbing not just lessons about letters and numbers, but rules about how to exist. You learned to raise your hand to speak, to color inside the lines, to sit still, to wait your turn, to seek permission before expressing curiosity. It all seemed harmless, even good. But beneath those simple routines, something profound was happening. Your brain was being programmed to trade authenticity for approval. Neuroscience shows that between the ages of 4 and 7, the brain enters a highly plastic state, a superabsorbent phase where neural patterns form around repetition and emotional reinforcement. This is when the architecture of belief begins to take shape. The praise you received for obedience released dopamine, teaching your brain that validation equals safety. The disapproval you felt when you questioned authority triggered cortisol, teaching your nervous system that disagreement equals danger. You didn't just learn lessons, you became them. Every rule you followed left a trace in the neural map of who you think you are. As the years passed, the pattern deepened. You learned that curiosity makes noise, and noise gets corrected. You learned that being wrong is not just an error, it's an emotional failure. Slowly, the brain rewired itself to avoid anything uncertain, spontaneous, or risky. It learned to chase approval instead of truth. To survive the social ecosystem of school, your mind built the very habits that now limit your potential as an adult. Fear of failure, chronic self-doubt, perfectionism, and hesitation. They're not personal flaws. They're learned programs written in the soft circuitry of childhood. Psychologist Daniel Goleman would call this emotional conditioning. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman would call it dopaminergic miswiring. René Descartes might have called it a corruption of clarity, a distortion of thought before the thinker ever learned to think freely. Whatever you call it, the result is the same. Your brain still runs the childhood code. Every time you hesitate before taking a risk, seek validation before speaking your truth, or silence an instinct to stay appropriate, that code executes quietly, efficiently, automatically. But here's the awakening. The very system that programmed you can be reprogrammed. Neuroplasticity doesn't care how old you are. It cares what you practice. The same mechanisms that once trained you to obey can now train you to awaken. The journey ahead is not about rebellion against the world, but liberation from the unseen architecture within your own mind. Because the cage was never physical, it was electrical. And now, you hold the key. The hidden curriculum of the mind. Every educational system teaches 2 curriculums. The first is written on paper, math, language, science. The second is written in emotion, obedience, conformity, comparison. It's the one no teacher mentions but every child learns. It's the curriculum of compliance. How to suppress instinct, how to blend in, how to silence your own intelligence so you can fit the mold. You were graded not only for your knowledge, but for how well you performed the version of yourself that others wanted to see. That's where the true programming began. Psychologically, the brain of a child learns through association. Each emotional experience becomes a neurochemical command. Do this again, or never do this again. When you received a gold star or a smile from your teacher, your brain released dopamine, the same molecule that fuels addiction. You weren't just rewarded for learning, you were rewarded for pleasing. When you were scolded or laughed at for being wrong, cortisol and adrenaline flooded your system, linking authenticity with danger. Over time, the nervous system concluded that emotional safety matters more than intellectual honesty. The child stopped exploring and started performing. This is how the hidden curriculum rewires the brain's motivational structure. Instead of seeking truth, the mind seeks permission. Instead of creating from curiosity, it creates from caution. And because the developing brain is designed to conserve patterns that ensure safety, these early emotional associations become the foundation of adult behavior. You grow up thinking you're chasing success, but you're actually chasing the same gold star, the same neural promise of being good enough in someone else's eyes. Jordan Peterson often says that true development requires voluntary confrontation with chaos. But when your brain has been conditioned to equate chaos with failure, you never take that step. You live half awake, driven by an invisible algorithm of avoidance. Every risk feels wrong. Every challenge feels dangerous, not because it is, but because your nervous system was trained to see unpredictability as threat. The most dangerous part? This program operates unconsciously. You think you're making rational decisions, but your biology is just replaying the lessons of the classroom. To break free, you must first expose the hidden curriculum. Start by noticing the moments you shrink back for no logical reason. That hesitation is not laziness. It's programming. It's your inner child waiting for permission that never comes. Awareness is the first act of rebellion, because once you see the script, you can stop reading it. You can begin writing your own. The system may have trained your brain to conform, but it cannot stop your awareness from evolving. The moment you begin questioning the rules you absorbed without consent, you awaken the part of the mind that school could never touch, the part built for truth, not approval. The death of curiosity. Curiosity is the original language of the mind, the first spark of consciousness that drives every human to explore, question, and create. Before you learned words, you learned wonder. But somewhere between your first question and your first grade, that natural impulse was quietly replaced by caution. You learned that not all questions are welcome. You learned that curiosity can be inconvenient, that asking why too many times disrupts order. Slowly, the fire that once drove exploration was replaced by a flickering instinct for self-preservation. You stopped asking to understand. You started asking to be right. Neuroscience reveals that curiosity is a dopaminergic process. Each time you wonder, your brain releases small bursts of dopamine, the same neurotransmitter that motivates progress and fuels creativity. It's nature's built-in engine for learning, but in childhood, that same circuitry was hijacked. Instead of rewarding discovery, your brain was retrained to release dopamine for approval. You began to crave the teacher's smile more than the thrill of an idea. Curiosity was replaced by performance. The chemical that once pushed you to explore the unknown became the same one that tethered you to the familiar. Andrew Huberman describes dopamine as the molecule of pursuit. It doesn't make you happy when you succeed, it makes you motivated to seek. When that seeking is externally directed, your entire reward system becomes dependent on permission. You stop exploring new frontiers of thought and instead become addicted to predictability. This is the birth of intellectual apathy, not the absence of intelligence, but the loss of inner permission to use it freely. Psychologically, this shift marks the beginning of cognitive rigidity. The mind learns that comfort is safer than growth. You start to avoid mistakes not because they're costly, but because they carry emotional risk. The nervous system now associates uncertainty with pain. Every new question threatens the fragile structure of identity that education built for you. By adulthood, you've mastered the art of rationalizing your curiosity away, convincing yourself that it's impractical, unnecessary, or too late. The truth is simpler. Your brain forgot what curiosity feels like without fear attached to it. Jordan Peterson often reminds us that truth hides behind what you're most afraid to confront. But a brain conditioned to seek safety over truth will never reach its potential. Fear paralyzes exploration, and without exploration, you stop growing. The tragedy is that most people don't lose curiosity. It's conditioned out of them, neuron by neuron, year after year, until silence feels safer than wonder. Yet neuroplasticity offers a way back. The circuitry of curiosity still exists, dormant, not dead. To reactivate it, you must relearn how to reward uncertainty. That means consciously pairing exploration with small doses of pleasure. Learning something new, pursuing a question with no clear answer, creating without judging. Each time you reward the act of seeking rather than the result, dopamine begins to work for you again. The chemistry of compliance becomes the chemistry of awakening. Curiosity is not childish. It's the essence of consciousness. It's the mind's rebellion against stagnation, the antidote to indoctrination. When you recover it, life stops feeling predictable and starts feeling alive again. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What could I discover?" That single shift, from performance to exploration, is how the brain begins to unlearn its oldest program. Because the mind that dares to wonder again is the mind that finally remembers what freedom feels like. The classroom conditioning loop. Every system of control depends on repetition. What begins as discipline slowly becomes identity. In school, this repetition wasn't only about math tables or grammar rules. It was about emotional patterns. The classroom was a laboratory where your brain was conditioned to respond to authority, approval, and failure in predictable ways. The lessons weren't written on the blackboard. They were etched into your nervous system through cycles of reward and punishment. And without realizing it, your mind learned to trade authenticity for safety. Behavioral psychology calls this operant conditioning, the process of shaping behavior through controlled consequences. When you obeyed, you were rewarded. When you resisted, you were corrected. Each smile, each red mark, each word of praise was a neurochemical signal teaching your brain which states were safe and which were dangerous. Dopamine for compliance, cortisol for curiosity. Over time, your nervous system learned the rule more deeply than any spoken lesson. Stay predictable, and you will be accepted. This invisible loop rewired your relationship with uncertainty. The anticipation of punishment became more powerful than the punishment itself. Even without a teacher present, your brain would self-regulate, predicting disapproval before it happened. The amygdala, your emotional alarm system, would light up at the first sign of conflict, activating the same physiological reaction that a child feels when scolded. The result? A grown adult who flinches at risk, who hesitates before speaking up, who calculates safety before authenticity. The classroom may be gone, but the loop continues. Andrew Huberman often explains that the brain's reward system adapts to expectation. If you consistently associate comfort with external approval, the brain learns to crave predictability. It rewards inaction because inaction prevents danger. The dopamine spike you once received for coloring inside the lines now comes from maintaining your routines, avoiding challenge, and staying within the limits of social acceptance. You call it being responsible. But underneath, it's the same conditioning, the nervous system equating familiarity with control. The tragedy is that what once protected you now sabotages you. The patterns that made you a good student make you an anxious adult. You follow invisible rules. Don't speak too loud, don't stand out too much, don't risk being wrong. Long after the authority figures have disappeared, you internalize the entire system, becoming both the student and the teacher, the one who obeys and the one who punishes.
Jordan Peterson describes this as the tyranny of the superego, the voice of internalized authority that keeps you small in the name of order. And Daniel Goleman would call it emotional hijacking, your physiology reactivating childhood scripts in the face of perceived rejection. Together, they form a perfect loop. The body reacts as the mind obeys, and the mind obeys because the body reacts. To escape the loop, you must introduce disorder, conscious, deliberate, meaningful disorder.
Break small patterns on purpose. Speak when silence feels safer. Choose curiosity over certainty. Each time you do, you create cognitive dissonance, the discomfort that signals new learning. The brain resists at first, flooding you with doubt. But if you stay present, the chemistry begins to shift. Dopamine starts linking to self-expression rather than obedience. Cortisol retreats as safety redefines itself. This is how you dismantle the classroom conditioning loop. Not by fighting the past, but by teaching your nervous system a new equation. Authenticity equals safety. The rules that once trained you to survive no longer apply to the person you're becoming. The test is over. The lesson now is freedom. The birth of the inner judge. The most lasting authority you ever encountered wasn't a teacher, a parent, or a system. It was the voice that those figures left behind. The inner judge is not born with you, it's installed. It begins as an echo, a faint recollection of correction, and eventually becomes a permanent internal presence, a voice that watches, evaluates, and condemns. You learned early that to avoid punishment, you had to anticipate it. Over time, your brain perfected this adaptation. It learned to criticize you before anyone else could. That's how self-sabotage disguises itself as self-protection. Psychologically, this internalization is the hallmark of social conditioning. The child, powerless to challenge external authority, absorbs it instead. The nervous system equates control with safety, so it builds an inner version of every external critic. Neuroscience confirms this. The same neural circuits that process external feedback also activate during self-criticism. Your brain doesn't distinguish between being scolded by others and scolding yourself. The chemistry is identical. Cortisol rises, dopamine drops, focus narrows. You become the warden of your own mind. Daniel Goleman calls this the amygdala hijack, when emotion overrides logic and self-judgment becomes physiological. What began as a defensive response becomes an automated program. Every time you think, "I can't do this," or "I'll fail again," your brain releases the same stress hormones it did when you were a child facing disapproval. The body tenses, breathing shallows, and focus collapses inward. The lie feels true because your entire physiology participates in it. This inner judge is efficient, logical, and merciless. It borrows the tone of whoever once made you feel small, the teacher who embarrassed you, the parent who compared you, the peers who laughed at you. It uses their voices but your intelligence. It learns your weaknesses and weaponizes them. It doesn't need evidence to condemn. It only needs memory. The more it speaks, the more authority it gains, until the judge becomes indistinguishable from your own identity. You think you're being responsible when you're being controlled. You think you're being realistic when you're just repeating an inherited script. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. The inner judge is the brush." Each self-critical thought adds another layer of conditioning, until the vibrant curiosity of your mind is muted beneath a single color, fear. The tragedy isn't that you believe the voice, it's that you think it's yours. To dismantle it, you must separate perception from truth. Notice the voice without obeying it. When it whispers, "You're not ready," observe the tone. Is it reason or memory? Is it fact or residue? Awareness is the solvent that dissolves illusion. As Andrew Huberman explains, when awareness intervenes, the prefrontal cortex regains control from the amygdala. The emotional storm loses its grip and logic returns. The inner judge feeds on unconscious agreement. It starves in the presence of conscious attention. Jordan Peterson often reminds us that responsibility is not submission. It's mastery. To take responsibility for your mind is not to obey it, but to direct it. You can still correct yourself without cruelty, still improve without humiliation. The difference lies in tone, in transforming the judge into a teacher. When you learn to speak to yourself with clarity instead of punishment, your brain's chemistry shifts. Dopamine returns, focus expands, and growth becomes sustainable. The voice inside you doesn't disappear, but it learns its place. It becomes feedback, not law, guidance, not tyranny. That's when self-discipline becomes freedom, when you stop fighting the voice and start teaching it how to speak the truth. Dopamine and the prison of approval. Dopamine is the currency of motivation, the invisible fuel that drives every human action. But most people never realize that their supply has been hijacked. From the first time you received praise for good behavior, your brain began linking dopamine not to discovery or authenticity, but to approval. It's a chemical deal you didn't consent to. Safety in exchange for self-betrayal. What once evolved to reward curiosity and progress was rewired to reward compliance. You stopped chasing meaning and started chasing permission. Neuroscience makes it clear. Dopamine doesn't reward outcomes. It rewards anticipation. The brain releases it when it expects pleasure, not when it achieves it. As a child, you learned that approval equals pleasure, so your nervous system began predicting satisfaction every time you pleased authority. That prediction became addictive. Each compliment triggered a hit of dopamine, reinforcing the behavior. Each criticism withdrew it, creating withdrawal. Over time, your mind became chemically dependent on validation, just like an addict depends on a substance. Andrew Huberman describes dopamine as the molecule of pursuit. It teaches the brain what to chase. When approval became the target, self-expression became a risk. Your motivation system reorganized around external reward, how others saw you, what they thought of you, whether they smiled or frowned. The tragedy is that dopamine doesn't care about truth. It only cares about repetition. The more you chased recognition, the more your brain prioritized it. And slowly, you lost the ability to act for yourself. This is the prison of approval, invisible, elegant, and efficient. It keeps you productive, polite, and predictable. You learn to perform sincerity, to calibrate every opinion for likability, to measure worth by reaction. Even rebellion becomes calculated, not freedom, just another bid for recognition in disguise. Social media amplifies this loop to perfection. Each like, each notification, is a digital replica of the teacher's praise, releasing the same neurochemical pattern you learned decades ago. It feels like connection, but it's control. Psychologically, this creates what Daniel Goleman calls emotional dependency, the inability to regulate one's emotional state without external confirmation. The brain's reward system becomes externalized. When no one approves, your dopamine baseline drops, leaving you restless, unfocused, and hollow. This is why silence feels unbearable, why being unseen triggers panic, and why you often confuse attention with affection. You're not craving people, you're craving the chemistry they trigger. The Stoics warned about this centuries ago. Epictetus taught that freedom begins when you stop placing your happiness in things beyond your control. Neuroscience now confirms it. Every time you seek approval, you outsource your dopamine. You give your brain's reward system to someone else's judgment. The only way back is internal ownership. Reclaiming dopamine doesn't mean rejecting people. It means retraining your mind to generate reward from integrity instead of applause. Each time you act in alignment with truth, even silently, even unseen, your brain receives a natural, stable form of dopamine. It's quieter than the spike of validation, but deeper. It comes from coherence, not chaos. Joe Dispenza often says that what you practice, you become. The more you practice self-approval grounded in clarity, the more your brain adapts. It begins to predict pleasure from honesty rather than performance. The chemistry of dependence transforms into the chemistry of authenticity. The moment you stop chasing dopamine through others is the moment you start producing it through purpose. You no longer beg for validation. You embody it. The world doesn't need to reward you anymore because your biology already does. That's not arrogance. It's sovereignty. The mind, once enslaved by approval, learns to find joy in truth itself, the illusion of safety and the fear of freedom. Safety is the most seductive illusion your brain has ever created. From childhood, you were taught that security meant obedience, that the safest path was the one already drawn for you. Stay quiet, follow the rules, color within the lines, and you'll be fine. Your nervous system took that message and carved it into its very structure. It learned that safety comes from predictability, and that unpredictability means danger. The result? A brain that fears freedom as much as it craves it. Neuroscience explains why. The amygdala, the brain's threat detector, evolved to prioritize survival over satisfaction. When faced with uncertainty, it sounds an alarm, even when the threat is psychological, not physical. Andrew Huberman notes that uncertainty increases dopamine volatility, meaning the brain's reward system becomes unstable when outcomes are unclear. Instead of excitement, many people feel anxiety. Their brains have been trained to associate stability with safety, even if that stability means stagnation. That's why so many people stay in jobs, relationships, and routines that quietly destroy them. It's not comfort they seek, it's the absence of fear. But here's the paradox. The human brain is designed for adaptation. Its greatest joy isn't in comfort, it's in challenge. The prefrontal cortex lights up when you confront novelty, the part responsible for creativity, decision-making, and meaning. The moment you step into the unknown, your brain actually grows, yet conditioning has reversed the equation. The very thing that should feel alive now feels threatening. This is the legacy of childhood programming, the nervous system mistaking freedom for danger. Aristotle understood this long before neuroscience existed. He wrote that character is built through habituation. We become what we repeatedly do. If your repetition has been avoidance, your courage atrophies. If your habit has been compliance, your confidence decays. The illusion of safety becomes the architecture of your own limitation. You're not trapped by circumstance. You're trapped by your comfort with it. Daniel Goleman would call this emotional conditioning, the nervous system's addiction to familiar emotional states. Even when those states are painful, they're predictable. The brain prefers a known discomfort over an unknown peace. That's why freedom terrifies those who have never felt safe inside their own minds. They confuse stillness with danger because, biologically, chaos feels like home. To break this illusion, you must teach your body that uncertainty is not the enemy. Start small. Controlled exposure to discomfort, deliberate acts of unpredictability, taking a new route, expressing an unpopular truth, pausing before reacting. Each act of conscious discomfort rewires the fear circuit. The amygdala learns that uncertainty doesn't equal death, it equals growth. The prefrontal cortex strengthens, and clarity replaces panic. The more often you walk into the unknown with awareness, the more the nervous system stabilizes. That's neuroplasticity in motion, biology learning courage. Marcus Aurelius called this the discipline of perception, the ability to see clearly without panic. Freedom isn't the absence of structure, it's the ability to choose your own. The mind that fears freedom has forgotten that safety is not found in control, but in competence. The more capable you become of facing uncertainty, the safer you feel in any situation. The illusion of safety dissolves when you realize that predictability was never peace, it was anesthesia. The comfort you cling to isn't protection, it's paralysis. Real safety begins where you stop needing guarantees, because when you no longer fear the unknown, your brain stops defending the cage. It starts building wings. The default mode network, the voice of the program. When your mind goes quiet, when you're not focused on a task or distracted by noise, something strange happens. A hidden system in your brain lights up. The default mode network. It's the orchestra of your inner voice, the background hum of identity, the place where memory and imagination blend into a constant internal monologue. It's what most people mistake for thinking. But in reality, it's the sound of your programming speaking back to you. Neuroscientists describe the default mode network, or DMN, as the brain's resting state system. It activates when you're daydreaming, recalling the past, or imagining the future. In healthy balance, it's essential. It helps you form a coherent sense of self. But when left unchecked, it becomes the echo chamber of your conditioning. Every belief, fear, and insecurity you absorbed since childhood gets replayed here, disguised as rational thought. You're not hearing reality. You're hearing memory filtered through bias. Andrew Huberman explains that the DMN thrives on prediction. Its function is to anticipate what comes next based on what's already known. The problem? If your past was built on self-doubt, comparison, and compliance, your DMN predicts more of the same. It keeps you mentally trapped in a feedback loop, replaying your mistakes, worrying about approval, and rehearsing conversations that never happened. It's not that you can't stop overthinking, it's that your brain believes overthinking keeps you safe. The DMN's constant activity is why silence feels so uncomfortable for most people. When external distractions fade, you're left alone with the noise of internal repetition. The same phrases return. I'm not enough. What if I fail? They won't understand. These aren't random thoughts. They're the subconscious script of the hidden curriculum you absorbed years ago. Neuroscientifically, this is self-referential processing, the brain mistaking habitual thought for identity. The more time you spend lost in this loop, the stronger it becomes. Like a muscle, it grows through use. Jordan Peterson often describes identity as a narrative, a story we tell ourselves about who we are. The DMN is the storyteller, and it never stops talking. It edits your experiences to preserve consistency. If you believe you're unworthy, it highlights every rejection and deletes every compliment to keep the story intact. It's not malicious, it's efficient. The brain's goal is not truth, it's stability. Even misery can feel safer than change because it fits the story. But here's the awakening. You can interrupt the DMN. The tool is attention. When you shift from passive rumination to active awareness, the task-positive network, the system responsible for focus and presence, suppresses the DMN. This isn't just metaphorical, it's biological. Mindfulness, breathwork, creative flow, even deep learning, all of them deactivate the default narrative. The voice quiets, and a different kind of awareness emerges, one that observes thought without being consumed by it. Joe Dispenza calls this the shift from the known self to the observer self. In that moment, you realize that the voice in your head is not you. It's just your past speaking. You can listen without obeying. You can observe without identifying. And every second you remain conscious in that space, you weaken the old neural circuits that once defined your sense of self. The DMN doesn't disappear, it evolves. It starts serving awareness instead of overshadowing it. This is what Descartes sought through philosophy and what neuroscience now confirms. Clarity is not found in thinking more, but in thinking less reactively. The mind's default voice is not the enemy. It's a mirror. When you finally stop believing everything it says, the mirror becomes a window, and through it, you see the vastness of who you could become. The rebellion of awareness. Awareness is the quietest revolution that can ever occur inside a human being. It doesn't shout. It doesn't fight. It simply watches. And in that act of observation, it dismantles illusions that have ruled you for decades. The moment you become aware of a thought, it loses its authority. The machinery of conditioning begins to falter because it depends on blindness to function. Awareness doesn't destroy the program. It makes it transparent, and transparency is its undoing. The rebellion begins when you stop trying to change your thoughts and start seeing them for what they are. Electrical impulses produced by a brain designed to predict, not to understand. Andrew Huberman often explains that the prefrontal cortex, responsible for conscious control, can override the automatic responses of the limbic system, but only when attention is active. Awareness is that attention. When you notice a thought instead of reacting to it, your prefrontal cortex lights up, and the old pathways of fear and self-doubt start to weaken. Each observation is a micro-rewiring, a tiny act of defiance against the past. Jordan Peterson describes this confrontation with inner chaos as the first step toward order. Awareness is not passivity. It's disciplined clarity. It sees the emotion, acknowledges it, and refuses to let it dictate behavior. When anger arises, awareness watches it burn without fueling it. When shame appears, it's seen as a conditioned response, not a verdict. This practice slowly restores sovereignty over the mind. You stop living as a character inside your story and begin existing as the author who observes it unfold. Joe Dispenza calls this state becoming the observer of the self. In this space, neuroplasticity accelerates. The brain stops firing along the same worn pathways of guilt, fear, and repetition, because you're no longer energizing them with emotion. You're re-educating your nervous system to associate neutrality, even peace, with awareness. Over time, the circuits of survival give way to circuits of presence. Dopamine no longer rewards escape. It rewards insight. The chemistry of fear turns into the chemistry of clarity. Philosophically, this is what Descartes meant by the pursuit of certainty through self-observation, and what the Stoics practiced through reflection. Awareness exposes the mind's illusions, not to destroy them in anger, but to render them irrelevant. You begin to see that thoughts are events, not commands. Emotions are signals, not identities. The more you observe, the less they control you. The rebellion of awareness is not a war against thought. It's emancipation from identification. At first, awareness feels like distance. You stand apart from the noise, unsure of who you are without it. But soon that distance becomes space. The space in which truth can breathe. It's where choice returns. You can respond instead of react, create instead of comply, understand instead of fear. This is the first taste of freedom that no system, no authority, no programming can take away. The real revolution doesn't happen outside you. It happens the moment you realize that the observer was always there, waiting patiently for you to notice. Awareness doesn't conquer the mind, it enlightens it. And once the light is on, the darkness has nowhere left to hide. Rewriting the brain's operating system. Once awareness is awake, the work begins. You start to see that your brain isn't your enemy. It's a programmable machine that's been running old software since childhood. Every belief, every reflex, every habit is a line of code written by repetition and emotion. The only reason the system feels permanent is because you've mistaken routine for truth. But the human brain is plastic. It edits itself through experience. And with deliberate awareness, you can rewrite the entire operating system that once ruled you. Neuroplasticity, as Andrew Huberman explains, is the brain's ability to change itself through focused attention and consistent repetition. When you think a thought or perform an action with emotional intensity, neurons fire together and wire together. That wiring becomes a pattern, and that pattern becomes your personality. The same process that created your fear of failure, your need for validation, or your paralysis in uncertainty, can be used to undo them. You don't need to destroy the old code. You just need to stop running it. Each time you choose presence over reaction, curiosity over judgment, the brain reassigns its pathways, pruning the obsolete and reinforcing the new. Psychologically, this process mirrors the core of cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT teaches that when you change your interpretation, you change your emotion. And when you change your emotion, you change your behavior. But the rewiring isn't just cognitive, it's chemical. Dopamine begins to reward truth instead of approval. Serotonin stabilizes as you build integrity with yourself. Endorphins rise when your actions align with your values. The neurotransmitters that once chained you to external validation start serving your inner coherence. Biology follows belief. Joe Dispenza's research adds a crucial layer. Emotion is the bridge between thought and physiology. The more vividly you feel a new state of being, confidence, calm, focus, while holding it in awareness, the faster the brain encodes it as real. This is not wishful thinking. It's biological training. You are teaching your neurons to fire as if the new pattern already exists. And once they do, the body follows, because the brain doesn't distinguish between imagination and experience, only between attention and neglect. But rewriting the code demands discipline. Awareness must become practice. Aristotle said that excellence is not an act but a habit, and neuroscience agrees. Change happens not through intensity, but through consistency. Repetition is the sculptor of identity. The more you act in alignment with clarity, no matter how small the step, the more your brain learns that authenticity is safe. The nervous system stops bracing for rejection because truth becomes its new normal. You're no longer reacting to the old script, you're authoring a new one. Jordan Peterson often reminds us that structure is what gives chaos form. Rewriting the brain's code doesn't mean erasing discipline, it means creating a new hierarchy of meaning. Instead of obeying authority, you begin obeying reality. Not the version you were taught to fear, but the one you now perceive clearly. Each conscious decision becomes a command written directly into your neural architecture. I choose clarity. I choose courage. I choose truth. The beauty of this process is that the brain doesn't care about your past. It only listens to what you repeat. Every day becomes a line of new code, every act of awareness a patch to the old system. Over time, the mind that once sabotaged you becomes your ally. It starts serving awareness instead of suppressing it. The program that was once written to protect you evolves to empower you. You are no longer the product of your past conditioning. You are the programmer of your future consciousness. The system doesn't own you anymore. You've learned to write your own code. The return of the inner child. Beneath every layer of conditioning, beyond every defense your mind has built, there still lives the first version of you. The one who was curious before he was cautious, expressive before he was evaluated, free before he was taught to fear. That part of you never disappeared. It was buried, silenced under decades of programming, performance, and protection. But when awareness matures and the mind rewires itself toward truth, something unexpected happens. The child returns. Not naive, not fragile, but awake, fearless, and whole. Psychologically, this return represents integration. The brain's hemispheres, once divided between logic and emotion, begin to harmonize. The prefrontal cortex, where conscious awareness resides, stops suppressing the limbic system, the seat of instinct and feeling, and begins to collaborate with it. Andrew Huberman would describe this as emotional regulation through connection, not control. It's the brain's recognition that sensitivity was never weakness. It was information. The parts you learned to hide are not obstacles to wisdom. They are its roots. Daniel Goleman's work on emotional intelligence explains that true mastery comes when emotion and reason operate together. The adult mind provides structure. The inner child provides vitality. The child dares. The adult refines. Together they form balance, chaos with clarity, freedom with focus. When this integration occurs, your nervous system stabilizes. Dopamine no longer spikes from approval. It flows from alignment. Serotonin rises from coherence, the feeling of being in harmony with yourself. The same biology that once rewarded obedience now rewards authenticity. Philosophically, this is what Marcus Aurelius and Seneca called returning to nature, living in accordance with your essence rather than your conditioning. It's what Descartes sought through reason and what Joe Dispenza describes through neuroplastic awakening. You rediscover the part of consciousness that existed before the narrative, the awareness that observes without judgment, acts without fear, and loves without agenda. This isn't regression, it's evolution completing its circle. You're not going back to who you were, you're remembering what you always were beneath the programming. The return of the inner child doesn't make life easier, it makes it real. You stop chasing perfection and start pursuing truth. You no longer need permission to express yourself because your validation comes from coherence, not applause. You begin to play again, not in the childish sense, but in the creative sense. Life stops being a checklist and becomes an experiment. You rediscover curiosity, and with it, meaning. The same brain that once avoided uncertainty now thrives on it, because it remembers that discovery is its natural state. Jordan Peterson often says that responsibility gives life meaning. The child within you is not free without the adult structure. But the adult without the child's spirit becomes mechanical. Integration is the synthesis of both. Discipline guided by wonder. It's the moment when self-awareness replaces self-judgment, when fear dissolves into fascination, and when effort becomes expression. That's the psychological resurrection, the point where survival gives way to creation. The mind that once sabotaged you now serves you. The voice that once criticized now collaborates. You think clearly, feel deeply, and act deliberately. You've returned to the beginning, but this time with consciousness. The same brain that was programmed to obey has learned to think. The same system that once feared freedom has learned to love it. And in that realization, the cycle ends. You are no longer the student of the program. You are its author. The inner child, once silenced, now guides you with the wisdom of innocence and the strength of awareness. The world hasn't changed, but you have. You've remembered who you were before the world taught you who to be.